taking pronouns and allowing to say, I now kneel at the knee of wokeness has geopolitical consequences.
Yeah.
Culminating in wars that could lead to World War III.
Yeah.
Because it's completely the mindset.
Yeah.
The woke crowd sees the Palestinians as the tip of the sword against Western colonization of the Middle East. Congrats. Wokeism has just supported terrorism, and it's unveiled its very authoritarian hand.
Mm-hmm. Hello, everyone. My name is Jason. I'm here with Dimitri.
Hello.
And welcome to Intimate Discourse. I'd like to have a little conversation today. It's been a while since we've had a show, actually, contrary to our planned deployment cadence that we had hoped for this year. But it has been a weird, busy year, I think, for both of us and for everybody. I mean, this just things seem to get crazier and crazier in this wacky world of ours. Today we want to focus, though, on the devastating October 7th attacks and the more specifically the Western reaction to those attacks. Try and ascertain the psychology behind what is motivating the protests and the divisions that we're seeing in what really should be a fairly straightforward and you would think a fairly uniting event. You would think that the response to this would have been sort of different than it's been. And we're just going to try and understand that as best as we can. I guess we should start off just a little bit with, obviously there's been a lot of coverage of these attacks and the subsequent invasion of Gaza. Okay, so let's start on this. Obviously, Hamas October 7th sent in, I don't know, a few thousand. I want to call them troops, but what would you call them?
Freedom fighters, Jay?
Sure, liberators. No, so we sent in. So they sent in a sort of a battalion of fighters across the border, like a Dothraki horde, and they went in and butchered a bunch of civilians, and then they sort of locked down a few areas for a few hours, devastated much of the population that they really whatever they could get their hands on, and then retreated back to their various bunkers in Gaza. We have the Israeli response was not as swift as I would have thought to this, but they did
unprecedentedly slow.
Yeah, it was quite slow, and I think it was very measured, and it's probably due to the fact that there's obviously going to be this whole, their response would be sort of forensically examined by everybody who had an opinion on the matter, and they were really being held under the microscope as to how they would respond to this. There's a few angles. We sort of have somewhat limited amount of time to get into all this, but I think that the Israeli intelligence failure, obviously was catastrophic, and whether this was a true failure in the sense that, they just didn't do their jobs, somebody is to blame for that, catastrophic failure. I've always seen. You always hear about Mossad, and you hear about the Israeli Defense Forces, and you always think of kind of elite, top, highly trained fighters. Their whole population is like a reservoir of fighting force. They have a well trained
for sure. But and there's two. I think it's kind of like a choose your own adventure right now. You can go either way. Like, how did they let this happen? Or did they let it happen on purpose? You've heard those sort of more cynical responses too.
Right.
At any rate, it's atypical for such an advanced machine.
Mm-hmm.
The point is, where do we go from there?
Yeah.
Because that's why I don't get bogged down in the did they let it happen, or because it's happened.
Yeah.
And what are you going to do to go forward from there?
True, but that is a question that needs to be answered. Like maybe not now, but it's kind of like what I don't want out of this is, first of all, that was my first reaction was this was somehow intentionally done by the Israeli government in the sense that they let this happen. Now, that was just my gut reaction at the time. And to some extent, I understand, like, you can't kind of worry about that.
Is that your anti-narrative slant creeping in?
You know what? I just thought of all the borders, like of all the places, that there would be a weakness that 3,000 troops or whatever the number was, like, would get across seemingly like with just such ease, like on paragliders, like. And then all of it,
and rockets.
Yeah. And I've heard the explanations. It's like, okay, well, people were mostly deployed to the West Bank and like, they happened to hit at a time where it wasn't like heavily fortified, but it just didn't make sense to me. But that's, again, this is just me speculating at the beginning of this. And I think there's something to the sense that you can't get bogged down in that right now. But I don't want this to be like, the weapons of mass destruction in Iraq thing and like years go by.
They were technically at a ceasefire too now. Mm-hmm. So maybe that plays into it. And did you know this? Like the types of
well, they're still lobbing missiles over like regularly, so it's not really.
Yeah, but I think it was whatever that means. From a Western point of view,
people take that for granted, right? It's like it's like. I mean, what kind of a ceasefire is that?
Well, I don't know. I have to know how many rockets and what is it compared to previous times. Maybe that is considered a ceasefire.
Reduce the amount of rockets there. Yeah.
But did you know this? The population that lives inside Israel closest to the Gaza Strip tend to be populated by Israelis that are very pro-Palestinian.
I've heard that, and
they're more, for lack of a better, the more hippie types. Like, it's peace, it's love. We're going to set up near the wall. Mm. And to their credit, completely to Israel, they would bring over tens of thousands of migrant workers from the Gaza Strip daily.
To work and to do various.
Whereas I've heard in the West Bank, you tend to get the ones that are a little bit more standoffish, right? The ones in the settlements, you know. So in a sense, I think they're populating the land based on the personality types,
right?
So that can play a little bit into your how did this happen and why did it take so long to respond?
Sure, yeah, you can,
because you're like peace and love, man, and this starts to happen. Mm-hmm. You're not going to be like razor quick.
Right, I guess, but Israel is, I mean, they are in many ways a besieged country. Like they are this tiny little strip of land surrounded by enemies, and they never seemed the kind of country to let their guard down, and that they've had to not let their guard down, and that's what's allowed them to flourish as well as they have. But so I don't know. I would say that was a big.
Do you think in your heart they kind of let it happen a little bit? Not that they caused it, but they kind of said, well, because I did hear and it kind of died the story quickly. There was like a Egyptian intelligence agencies giving them like 3 days earlier warning that they were suspecting something to happen. Yeah, that story kind of popped up and disappeared relatively quickly.
I think it's.
And to plan this for over a year or two and not have a single person squeal is, again, atypical.
Right.
But I don't really bog down on that too much because it's like, if they did let it happen, you have to ask yourself, why did they let it happen? Mm-hmm. What state are they at in this sort of marriage of the two couples? Right. And why did they, it's the chicken or the egg. How far back are we going to go? Yeah. Because maybe we've had it with this sort of situation. Let this sort of thing kick off. I don't know how big it's going to be. And we're going to go back and now finish Gaza for good. Like you can see that being a way of thinking that would gain traction in a country like Israel. Yeah. Because to be quite frank, they've had 75 years of trying to make peace and they haven't been able to find peace. Right. So that's why I kind of go into that zone more, like the motives behind what would have happened, and how do you get out of it?
And you can get really cynical in like Netanyahu's troubles with the courts, where they were trying to. So that's real cynical, and I almost couldn't imagine going there. But
how did we get here? It's like how do we? So in order for that to even be playable, there has to have been many years of failed attempts. Right. Right. Yeah. And then how do you get out of the attempts? So I don't dwell on that day so much. Yeah.
But this is what kills me. First of all, I think intelligence agencies get a lot of, they get a lot of stuff, and it's always trying to find, like, you can always find, like, oh yeah, a year ago, Egypt reported, there was some murmurs about this kind of thing happening, but it's like, it was like the 9/11 attacks. There's always reports on that stuff. The job is to kind of filter through the noise. But with this, it was, it's like, it wasn't like a few stray I mean, it wasn't like a few stray people got through. It was like an organized, coordinated, like military assault. So like that the fact that that was successful, I find suspicious. But
also, like to go into your play, did the events of October 7th by Hamas further the Palestinian cause? Did they not know this was going to happen?
Yeah.
So that you spent 2 years planning to end up like inevitably having your people destroyed?
Yeah.
Like, congrats.
Right. No. Well, that's the other thing.
They'll never know we're going to be so clandestine about this for over 2 years.
Yeah.
And then what's the net effect?
Well, but so this is why I think is a division between the sort of foot soldiers, if you want to even call them soldiers, and the people at the top. Like if this thing was coordinated by Iran or some country like that, like you have for them, it's like sure, let's break that Israel Saudi deal that they're trying to make. Let's make sure the world
Abraham
remembers
Accords.
that this is a problem. Like we want people. Like we want war. We don't want peace. We don't want Israel to be at peace. So they're looking for to destabilize the situation. And the people at the bottom are like, it's almost like they're a pack of dogs. And it's like, okay, here's a cent. Like go get the Jews.
The truth is, if you take that logic, I think to its final destination, the only people that are actually caring about the Palestinians are the Israelis.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it may be a very, even at this point, with the way that they're invading it, it's to Israel's benefit to make sure that they are very careful about it. But yeah, I mean,
what did Hamas do in order to secure the Palestinians in the last 15, 20 years?
Yeah.
And October 7th is literally the culmination of like exactly their mentality.
Right.
Like one step forward, 1,000 steps backwards, right? And so to that point, then Iran is tapping Hamas, who then uses the Palestinian people. And again, I use that word loosely because it's really just a region of, did you know like genetically, they're actually Egyptians and like Jordanians and surrounding areas. Okay. And they actually came there after the Israeli people. So they made about 50% of the population came there in the last 50 years. So the Jewish people that came back in the last 75 years have actually been there about a quarter century longer than half of those who are living there now.
Right.
So I use the word Palestinian just for all intents in air quotes because it's really a loose.
We need a word to define.
It's like saying the West, try to define that.
Yeah.
But they're being used. These poor people are being used by Hamas and by extension Iran, and I'll even go further, by extension Russia. If Israel and America are one, are we looking at another proxy war here between Russia and America?
That was the day of the attacks, the first thing I thought of was this is probably orchestrated by Iran, and Russia probably had a hand in it because Russia has the most to gain by like having a distraction like that happening at a time where America's loyalty is then divided between, or I should say their budget is then their military aid budget is divided between Ukraine and Israel. So I think you take in all the circumstances of the election next year and all the inflation of the, that we're experiencing right now in the West, like all these sort of military expenditures is getting perilously close to, I think a big problem for the West. Like, I don't think that this can continue. And I think that it definitely, whether Russia was involved or not, I obviously don't know, but it certainly would benefit them. To be.
At this point now, they've kind of put onto the playing field Ukraine and Israel. And if America only has the will or the finances to save one, which of the two are they going to save?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Israel. Like, it's a brilliant play.
Yeah.
And again, no one cares about, and that's why like when I take the more let's say pro-truth, but in this case, I'm definitely on the Israeli side. Mm-hmm. But I would say they're the only ones that are actually showing any empathy for these Palestinian people.
Right.
Definitely not their leadership.
For sure.
Our leadership would try to make peace.
Yeah.
Not go in and like assassins in the middle of the night and go, well,
Right. Yeah, it wasn't even like, so the one meme that comes to mind is this one where, you see all these Hamas with their like Kalashnikovs like racing in, like cheering like Allahu Akbar or whatever.
Russian guns, by the way.
Yeah. Well, but they're pretty ubiquitous. But like then the next day they're kind of like turning to the world like with their hands folded in prayer, being like kind of help us or whatever. So that's like, well, that's sort of the cycle, right? Like and that's. But
do you know that's a little bit built into the whole like the Quran? Do you know how it kind of works? One third, one third, one third. When Muhammad was in his weaker state and he just had the original band of people, the first third of quotes in the Quran are like peace, 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 because it's like a military tactic. In the middle part of the Quran, where they started to get a little more foothold, like we're a religion of defensive. We don't ever go on the attack. And once they had actually got solidified power, that's where you get the more devastating quotes, where it's like, no, full court press.
Right.
So they're literally playing the playbook. You start off in a very peace mode, only to get yourself into a defensive mode. And then once you've secured that, you go into the offensive mode. Yeah. Which if you look back at like empires, like the Ottoman Empire, it's exactly how they played.
Yeah, it's an interesting, I've heard that about the Quran.
It's a brilliant piece of work, and it's much more simplified than Christianity. Like, I'll give credit where credit's due. It's a tidy single book, very good, you know. Christianity's got 5-6 different books all over the place, different, you know, it's just, but nevertheless, it's a political and a religious and a military game plan. Yeah. And it's a very good one. And that's what we're seeing here in the West, and we're very naive to it. Yeah. You know, there's an interesting quote by Sun Tzu. You know Sun Tzu, right? An evil man will burn his own nation to the ground to rule over the ashes. Right, yeah. And it's literally what we're looking at here. Yeah. And I think that's where Israel, going back to your October 7th and how it started, whether someone wants to take the more cynical approach, they let it happen or not, I think they've just lost their shit with these people. They're like, let it happen, then let her rip, because we're going to do this. You know, we hope it doesn't, but if it does, we're going to do this. Because I think that's the only, do you really think there's going to be a two-state solution? I don't think there should. To be honest, like if I think Israel should go in and just annex that area, and it's now Israel. Like that's now Israel. You can have, you know, everybody can practice their religion, everything, you know, you tighten up on the security. There's kind of no nonsense. Anybody, you know, you can have, if you have some sort of freedom of assembly, maybe it's naive to think you can have things like that in Gaza, but you simply go in and it's just Israel now. And you just take it over. And it's like, I think that sends a good signal to the West Bank as well. And it's kind of like enough of this. They're not, I remember a long time ago, people, you know, I was read in some forum, we were talking, like people were going back and forth about like, you know, who should have nuclear weapons. And it was like, I think this is when India and Pakistan were both like kind of getting this a while ago. But, and, you know, the notion came across and it's like, well, it's not fair that, you know, America gets to have them. They get to dictate who can and can't. And it's like, I think somebody responded and it was kind of like, yeah, but the problem is these other nations aren't grown-ups. Like they're not adults. They prove that they're not adults. And it doesn't matter what their culture is. It doesn't matter any of this. If you're talking about the security of a nation, like Gaza, like Hamas, Gaza, the Palestinian people have proved that they can't manage themselves. In this sense, you know, I would say, you know, the word anti-Semitic is kind of strange because they're all Semitic peoples, really, when you're looking at that region. Right. But I would say, wouldn't you not agree that, you know, even though they could be quite similar, Israel is playing a very geopolitically savvy 2023 game, like you said, as adults. How do you conquer a land, in a sense? Right. And I don't mean this disparagingly, but the Arabs, the Palestinians, are playing kind of the noble savage. Like since 1948, I've told you I don't agree with your country being here. I said it to the United Nations, and I haven't wavered at all. Right. They're being very forthright. Yeah. You know, like they haven't wavered. They haven't played any kind of sneaky political game in that sense. You know, but they're not being geopolitically mature, not realizing the events of World War II and World War I, the breakup of the Ottoman Empire, and what that means. And you know what, when you don't side with the British in either major war, and the British win both major wars, and now the British have their British mandate over Palestine, don't expect too many favors. Right. There's something to be said about standing up for your team or abandoning them. And when you abandon them and lose, there's going to be geopolitical consequences. In this case, they haven't had the maturity to realize the consequences of their own decisions. Right. So I think that's where we're getting at. So they're acting like the noble savage, and Israel's acting like the geopolitically savvy juggernaut. But they're really the same people. It's just taken completely, because I would say they've had really different evolutionary paths. Like they started in the same region, but when the Jewish people left, they ended up going to the empires of Western and Eastern Europe, Austrian, Hungarian Empire, Prussian, Russian. When you're inside a larger context of an empire, you learn to deal with the situation at hand. So they were a small ethnic group trying to blend in and survive, and you're picking up skills. When those empires then collapsed and became like the ethno-states, and they go, well, what are these Jewish people doing here? We want them out of our country, culminating in Germany, you know, sort of thing with Hitler. And they come back to Israel. They've just had 500 to 1,000 years of hardcore training on the geopolitical realities of the larger world.
Right.
And then now they come back home and they're like, okay, let's apply the skills we've learned.
Mm-hmm.
The Arabs, though, never left. They were underneath the Ottoman Empire. And their daddy basically never let them learn these sorts of things.
Yeah.
So now we have a very, like a scholar versus a high school student battling over the same land.
Right. Yeah.
Right? Yeah. So I think that's where they diverged evolutionarily. And now we've plopped them back together.
It reminds me of like how viruses propagate. So if you have, when the Europeans came to North America, the Europeans had been in big cities. They had been like mingling with other peoples and other cultures. So there was a lot of like sort of immunity built in just to their bodies, and it's sort of been passed down, and et cetera. Where North America, it was fairly like they just didn't have the exposure to large cities. Like they were mostly in smaller villages, so they didn't have like constant people and they weren't introduced to like new viruses or new cultures and such. So when the Europeans did come, all those viruses, it was just like a complete, that was the attack. They were just like riddled with the like plagues and such, because they just weren't used to it. They hadn't acclimatized.
It's evolutionary. You can literally say it's a biological evolution.
Yeah.
And that's so now you're seeing these two, like you said, almost you don't want to call humans viruses, but some eco-green people would, and they're back in the same zone, and one can't really seem to live with the other.
Yeah.
Because they're completely approaching it. But to your point about going in and, I don't like the idea of like, forcibly moving these people out of Gaza. I can only understand, once you go back 3 generations, you feel like it's yours. I totally understand that. But the truth is they've had a chance to have their own country on many, many numerous times. I think about 5 or 6 times. They could have had East Jerusalem as their capital and they refused to sign the deal. Mm-hmm. Now, was there things in these agreements that they didn't like? For sure. But, and there has been times 20 years ago where I would get into debates about this and take 100% the more Palestinian side. Like, how can you have a country and you don't have control of your own water supply? That's ridiculous.
Right.
But now I look at it a little bit differently. And I look at it a little more geopolitically savvy, I would say. Sign the deal and get your country recognized internationally. Mm-hmm. Deal with the water later.
Yeah.
And they were being again, a little noble. Like, no, we want the right setup.
Yeah.
So in that now, when you look at Hamas's charter, which did change in 2017, but up until 2017 was literally the destruction of Israel.
Right.
It's in their charter.
Okay.
Who really doesn't want 2 states? I wouldn't say the Israelis, who have offered them over 5 or 6 times a contract to sign.
Yeah.
Because the second the Palestinians sign that deal, they're legitimizing that Israel can exist.
Yeah.
And that is something they can't live with. So they're playing kind of like here, and put in more Canadian context, the Quebec card.
Right.
Like, we're going to leave. Oh, we got concessions. Okay, we're staying.
Yeah. I think that's the, and this is the problem that we keep running into, where it's like, there are other Arab states like Saudi Arabia, for example, that has evolved in a way, like originally nobody liked Israel, but there's like, you don't have to like your neighbors, like you have to do business with them. You have to, come to various accords so that you're not like attacking each other all the time. But it's like the situation in Gaza with Hamas and with Hezbollah as well is always this like, it's like an anachronistic notion to just like suddenly attack different people for the sake that they are, existing or whatever. It's like, who has the time for that anymore? It's 2023. Like it's enough already with the.
Are you saying Hamas attacking Israel?
Yeah.
Well,
yeah.
I think they see it as they're going to liberate Israel.
I know, but
it's their land. They don't even see themselves attacking a foreign country.
But this is why it's like Israel should just move in. And I'm not saying that they eject all the people.
But how do you change their thinking? I know
they go in and they change the administration, and it's going to be a tough few years. And I think in many ways Israel just doesn't want the hassle of having to deal with these people. Yeah. But you go in, people, maybe you put something in place where it's like, there is a. In terms of freedom of assembly and things like that, they maybe don't have the full rights of an Israeli citizen because they can't for security reasons. And like there are certainly going to be people that aren't happy about it. It might breed resentment, but I think over generations you'll have like things will. It's like
a Scotland England thing. Like,
yeah, it's like a festering wound. It's like either cut the arm off or or put the bomb on the wound, but you can't put the bomb on the wound.
And
So
there's
it's like,
certainly people, I'm sure, in the Israeli administration who rather cut the arm off.
right.
And
And
that's
then,
where you get the little heavy-handedness and whatnot. But then again, instead of looking at each one of those events, like, oh, did you see these? Because you go on TikTok these days and you see devastating images. But you really, unfortunately, that's what war looks like.
yeah,
It's what
people
we
have-
try to
yeah,
avoid
exactly,
war. War
yeah.
is horrific, you know?
Right.
And it's in that sense, I would say for the first time, the Palestinians are, they're not playing the smart geopolitical game, but they're actually playing a very smart social media game. They're beckoning almost their own citizens to get killed because it changes the public opinion in the West.
So this is like, and this isn't sort of the next thing I think we should segue into is like, are they playing a smart game? Because I'm bewildered at the response in the West, because it seems to me very obvious what they're doing. And it was in that meme I talked about earlier. It's like that was like put out the couple days after the.
It's obvious because you're aware of wokeism and the ills of it. But I think the youth. So have you ever? Sorry to cut you off, but have you ever seen in any other? Because it's not a new event. These two peoples have been going at it back and forth for 75 years. This many protests on the street from university students that are pro-Palestinian.
No.
Right.
No.
So what has happened in the last 5 to 10 years? All of a sudden, change. All the youths change a point of view on the Israeli-Palestine conflict.
Yeah, the mass immigration.
Mass immigration and also just wokeism in general, because they're going to view this as simply oppressed and oppressor.
Yeah.
That's it. And they're not going to know history deep enough, because kids don't know history, that as you and I grew up, Israel was literally the most oppressed peoples you could imagine. They went through World War II with Hitler.
Right.
They only see Israel as this big extension of the United States geopolitical ambitions of the Middle East.
I would argue even more than that, they don't even necessarily see it that way in any kind of real on any kind of real level. I think that it's well, let me start with this. So first of all, I guess there was a poll recently which was taken, and they kind of, it was a Harvard Harris poll, and they gauged a number of responses talking about the election, like Biden versus Trump, et cetera, but really focused a lot on the situation in Israel. And the responses of people in terms of if you're talking about the age cohort of like 18 to 24, there was 50% of that age cohort support Hamas over Israel, like 50% of that. All the other ones, as you get older, you get more like the support for Israel goes more until it's like overwhelmingly so.
A little more geopolitical savviness.
Yeah, exactly. And then you have 51% Israel should be eliminated and given to Hamas. That was the response. So it's like, and the way these questions, I actually have the survey here, but it's like the way the questions were worded were I'm sort of capturing it here. There's not like there was some hidden. It was the wording was changed or something. And 53% should be free to call for genocide in terms of that not violating free speech laws or free speech on campus. And then, you look at this and how they've treated free speech against, any other thing on campus. How Jordan Peterson tries to go give a lecture, and it's like,
if I don't use your pronouns, I'm criminally charged or something.
Exactly.
But you can say from river to the sea, and all of a sudden you're a freedom fighter.
Yeah, and just like literally calling for genocide, and that's what these people are claiming to believe. And I noticed. So there was this Amy Horowitz. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. I saw this on Twitter or X. And he went to San Francisco State University, and he went around asking people. He would kind of go up to them and be like, he's like, "Hey, I'm trying to so it was kind of worded as such, like, I'm trying to get some support we got to fight against what Israel's doing and this and that." And he's like, "So I want to talk about like how maybe you can donate some money. We're just trying to get some sort of support for some so we can hit some soft targets like schools or synagogues, that kind of thing." But he said it in such a way that it was very like buddy, very like pulling them aside, like, "Hey, like, come on, man, like this is what we're trying to do." And a lot of them, it was like, so nearly 50% of the people gave $5 to $20. They're all college students, so they don't have much money anyway. But 28 out of 35 people expressed support for what he was doing, which was going around like literally asking for money to hit soft targets, like Jewish soft targets.
That's how you get this. You've seen the sign, like the Queers for Palestine.
Yeah, it's the same. So I think I guess what I'm trying to say here is like I get the sense that these young people, and you know, this is the same. I think maybe with all young people, like we were probably the same as well. I don't think it has much to do with the issue at all. I don't think that there's any thought going into this. I think they want to be a part of something. And they're just like, if you're their friend or whatever, then it's like, okay, yeah, man, like I'll join this. Or it's if they're you know, there's a big protest going on. It's like, yeah, I want to be I'm against oppression, so sure. Like there's no thought about it.
Yeah, because it's all about, again, it's that whole intersectionality. It's all against oppression. And simply, if you're sitting at a higher and punching down, then that's the person that gets whatever you do to punch up is justified.
But I think it's also a numbers game. So you have sort of when you have a large amount of let's say, like the number of Jewish people versus
globally.
Well, globally very small, but like even on college campuses and things like that, like they're very much outnumbered by Arab students, right? Sure. So you're getting a lot of there's just more people that are saying, "Hey, come join our protest." So people want to fit in, so they go to the larger protests.
And what are students on all the time? And not that we're much better. They're on their phones.
Right.
And when you then have students that are on their phones all the time, they're not watching the CBC or City TV News or CNN or Fox or any of those things. Mm-hmm. They're getting their news from so you're going to have 2 billion people, 3 billion people that are pro-Palestinian uploading images and creating this echo chamber inside the little box of their phone. And they're going to feel like they're 100% have the world has their back. Yeah. So they can say these crazy statements thinking, well, what repercussions should come? Everybody agrees with me.
Right. It is, I mean, it's crazy, and it's so emblematic of the times we're living in where you see this. And honestly, as soon as it is exactly the manifestation, this is what happens when you have wokeism spreading its tendrils through society, and just like it waits for an event like this to pounce. And you're hearing people openly calling for the genocide of a race, and simultaneously thinking they're the good guys and they're the ones that aren't behaving like Nazis.
Wokeism has ruined our immune system. And whenever the next virus, it is a virus in itself that has ruined our immune response to these geopolitical problems. And when the next problem pops up, we don't have the intestinal fortitude or immune response to push back. Right. And then you're told not to, sort of like the good Canadian American boy is embarrassed of their flag or embarrassed of their anthem. Or the newest, I don't know if you saw, the Canadian Human Rights Council said that Christmas is discriminatory. So what happens to the response? And if you can't even celebrate at home, then what is your strength in projecting your influence globally? Weakened, diminished. Right? So you get you to feel bad about yourselves in your own cave. You're not going to venture out of it and try to influence the world in your own, shape the world in your own image. It's a brilliant play because it really takes I'm sure we did the same in the West to the late communist era Soviet Union. Mm-hmm. Get them, show them drop pictures and videos and VHS cassettes of beautiful landscapes in North America. Right. And then they sit there and they put them on their contrabands, VCRs, go, what the hell are we doing here? Yeah. Yeah. It made them not believe in their system either. Yeah. But it's a game.
It's, it's really fascinating. It reminds me of that Russian former KGB agent that I'm sure you've seen the video.
Yeah, Yuri Bezmenov.
And it was so prescient. It was talking about how one would infiltrate society and how a communist or
do you know where he taught at? He was a professor in Canada for a while too.
Was he?
Yeah.
U of T?
Maybe, but
you're asking
even more intimately. University of Windsor.
Oh, right.
Yeah, and I want to go back and check my my grades to see if I actually had this guy as a professor. He was a political science professor.
That's right. I remember that, and I remember checking as well, but I couldn't find his name in the same years that I was there.
And where, for those who don't know, where's Windsor located in Canada? Right on the border of the States. Mm-hmm. Literally right on the border. So it's very interesting.
Yeah. This whole I find what's happening now. The only good thing that has come of this. I think that it's finally galvanized a lot of people who maybe didn't know what we were talking about when we would say I've dished out a lot of I told you so's. Like, I'll just say that since then. Like, it's like, like everybody who is sort of seeing that this is happening in Israel and people protesting, like literally calling for the genocide of Jews in America and in Canada. It's like, and in Europe, this is like, see, this is what unchecked immigration, and this is what wokeism, and this is what, all this idea of just assuming that everybody on the earth is the same. This is what this gets you.
When you import people to your country that come from other countries it's in their charter to destroy these peoples, do you expect them just to give up their beliefs in a generation?
Right, yeah.
That's complete naivety.
Yeah.
So you're not just importing people, you're importing the beliefs that come with them.
Yeah.
And that was hard enough in the context of the Western umbrella. The people didn't like whoever was the newest, the Irish person that came initially, and then the unwanted from the Mediterranean, and then you had the Eastern Europeans. Oh, they're just so different. But still, we found a way to bond. And I'm sure we can over these, the East and West as well. But it's just the further you stretch away, the harder it becomes.
Well, I think a lot of it also has to do with time. And I guess you could argue, when the Irish came here, there was a lot and it was a bit overwhelming, but there was also a common culture. Like, Catholicism wasn't that different from Christianity,
Democracy,
or from, Protestantism or whatever.
Women's rights or lack thereof, but at least it was in sync.
Yeah, yeah. But you're talking about a completely different culture. And because immigration is so lax now, and there's so many people, we're bringing in into the West. I just think that I think if you have the numbers down, you have time for sort of cultural assimilation to take place to some extent.
As your culture grows and expands, as it should, because it should be diverse, but diverse but integrated.
Yeah, I don't know how diverse it should be.
When you look at, I understand, but when you look at clothing today, we have more. When people used to go to Paris, they'd want to what are the Parisian women wearing?
Right.
We want to be like these. They looked up to them. When new immigrants come to Canada today, I don't think they're looking up to our lifestyle, our culture, our clothing, our music, our anthem, our Christmas, and with some sort of reverence. Like, wow, I wish to aspire to be like that because I'm coming from Tier B country into Tier A, and therefore I want to be as Tier A as I can be.
Yeah,
I think they've just given up on that.
But I think
we've encouraged them. Like, yeah, of course,
yeah,
come here.
Yeah.
So when now you see, this is my problem with clothing and whatnot. It's not the piece of cloth, but people are mysterious enough behind their own heads. What their thoughts are, their views on sexism or gender or whatever. But that's at least in their own head, and I can't know. And outwardly, we shake hands, we do business, everything's okay. But when they then have an extension of those thoughts through their clothing, it's a lot more like, I don't even want to be part of your world. If I was young and single and saw a pretty girl in a hijab, would I feel comfortable going up and asking her on a date?
Right.
It's literally telling me don't do that. And that's not integration. That's not diversity. That's isolationism. Geographically combined, but culturally isolated. So that's where it's not open. You extend one hand to let somebody in, and then they kind of slap your hand away.
Yeah, I don't blame, other cultures coming here and being not impressed by Canada or what it has to offer.
It's our
culture.
fault. It's our fault. 100%.
For demeaning our own culture and demeaning, electing this fool we have, sort of and I would as never, our figurehead.
Just to cut you off and make to have the listeners know, I don't encourage telling anybody to wear or not wear something. It should be their own free choice. But we should have built an environment in which they wish to aspire to be like that, right? If you're like, I don't know, what's a silly example? You run the Toronto Maple Leafs, and you have a new player come in from the Montreal Canadiens. You want them to be proud to put on that jersey. Not I guess can I not still play on the ice with my old jersey?
Right.
You're not going to have very much great team cohesion that way, right? You don't want to force anybody to do that, but certainly you want to create the environment in which they wish to aspire to be integrated with Canada.
I think a lot of this. Do you remember when I think it was the RCMP where Sikhs wanted to have their turbans?
Yeah.
I think that kind of acquiescence to allow exceptions to rules, especially in the military,
And
was
even
a
though they were
problem.
done from kindness, and that man wanted to be a police officer, which is a wonderful thing, you know, and then that we were being like, you know, kind, like, you know, if you're going to take the West's values to the highest degree, you'd be like, well, they're actually going to be open and allow somebody to do such a thing.
Right.
But that openness, this is the catch-22,
Yeah.
can be used against you.
But it's like, well, because it's like, as a parent, you know, you don't let your kid get whatever he wants, right? Like you establish boundaries, and like there's a little bit of that here too. And it's not, you know, again,
But these
this
are
isn't
adults
about,
in a
like,
free world, so it's harder to say, well, we're very, very free, but we're not going to let you do that.
well, we're very, very free, but we have certain institutions and certain things. Like there are certain rules regarding the military. There's certain rules regarding, you know, public property. There's certainly rules. There's certain laws that we have. Like,
I
so
know.
overall,
No shirt, no shoes, no service, or
like,
no vaccine.
right. Like there should just, again, it comes again back to first principles, and you get like certain freedoms that you have, sure, and freedom of religion, by all means, freedom of religion. But like, you know, it doesn't mean, it's like maybe then because your religion, in your religion, you happen to wear a turban or whatever, then just the RCMP isn't the job for you. Unfortunately, that it just doesn't work. Like, you know, like there's, you know,
And you'd have a hard time justifying that though in a court, because like, does it impede the person from doing their job? No, it's a deeper, more nuanced, long-term cultural thing.
Yeah, right? I think that there just needs to be lines that are drawn. Like I remember, I couldn't be a police officer. Not that I would ever want that job now, but like I remember when I was young, I was kind of looking into going into the OPP, and I couldn't do it because my vision isn't like a certain amount. And I was like, well, I have contact lenses. Like, so I would argue, like, how is that possibly going to impede me? It's the same with, you know, maybe you have to be able to pass certain physical tests. It's like, of course you should have to pass physical tests. Like, and if you can't do it, then you can't.
And with the eyes, you know, like, you know, you had good eyes when you started, but 25 years in, you probably don't have good eyes. So inevitably it's going to happen anyways.
Exactly. Or you're going to get out of shape, and like, I don't know how often they retest people. But anyway, I just think that kind of attitude, that was sort of the time to
So we're seeing a limit, and I know you're more of an absolutist on this, but we're seeing a limit to our freedoms. In order to maintain, in a sense, the freedom we have, it's very Orwellian. We almost have to put a limit on some of the freedoms, because if we're so free that we allow those who have less freedoms to propagate throughout society, we'll end up at a net negative. Okay. So, because it's so anti-Zionism, or Zionism in general. Where do you stand on that?
So Zionism being like there should be an Israel homeland?
Well, this is how I've read about it. So Zionism started like in the late 1880s, and it was a process that's been going on. And it was basically from secular Jewish people living in the diaspora.
Yeah.
How do you say it in English? Diaspora? Like, I always want to
diaspora.
defer to
I know how it's spelt, but I don't know how
diaspora.
Diaspora. Right.
Sorry. When you have two languages and you don't know, you don't use a word often enough. But anyways, so what it was actually secular Jewish people saying, well, God ain't coming back to help us. We have to help ourselves. And so let's start this sort of pro-nationalistic movement to try to repatriate back home. And of course, the events of World War II helped accelerate that process, and the fact that the largely Arab nations didn't side with the Allies wasn't going to bode so well when it came up to dividing the land and yada, yada. But the problem is today is everything that something happens, people go, well, you know, it's the Zionists. Is anti-Zionism just politically correct wording for anti-Semitism? And how do you not pull the two apart? Like, you're being proud, you're a patriot of wanting to have your own country. No one is saying then, therefore, you must go bomb other people because you're some warmonger. You're diffusing the line you're making it too soft to cross into that one.
I've never really understood anti-Semitism, and before this attack, I'm guilty of thinking really it didn't exist. Like, we're actually going to have somebody on the show who I was going to say, like, look, where is that? Like, you hear that this happens,
but my God, right? Like, it's really out there.
Well, this is the thing. I guess what I can't wrap my head around is, like, what do people have against the Jews? You know what I mean? Because this is like historically I'll tell you what they have, and this is why it blends into wokeism too. Okay, so wokeism is all about the oppressed versus the oppressor. Okay, so if the Jewish people were historically some of the most oppressed of the last 100 years, and perhaps last 1500, hell, go all the way back to Moses if you want, like highly oppressed, kicked out of Egypt, kicked out of Israel,
Even coming back, they have issues, right? But as an oppressed group, they have been extremely successful globally. That blows up the entire wokeism narrative that the oppressed can't succeed.
Yeah.
So they need to eliminate them because they are the canary in the coal mine going, actually, you can be oppressed and still succeed. It's not about being oppressed. It's about having a culture, a religion, a sense of values. You're going to sell a farm to educate your children. That's what makes you, it's actually open source code. It isn't some cabal secret. It's like, you want to go at it and try to be successful? This is what the Jewish people did. Good luck.
Yeah. I mean, that just seems it just seems like such a petty reason, I guess. I mean, I guess any of that kind of stuff is, but like, especially for people in the West.
Petty, but if you're trying to control the world through like a very centralized means, and you have these outliers that are typically very small in numbers and small in power doing exceedingly well, how much of a control centralized mechanism will they actually need?
But I mean, so as an individual,
they don't need UBI,
but
basically.
But as an individual, so I would also say that it's kind of like, I mean, there are poor Jewish people, right? So it's not like
but on average,
on average, this is like quite a they're doing quite well,
and we should try to emulate them, not be anti-Semitic. Like that's the whole weird trick, right? Like what have they done that has been so successful, and Asians as well.
Yeah.
Talking about that, like Asian women outperform white men in the States. So if there's racism is such an all-being systemic problem, how come we have these outliers? And there was actually an Aristotle Institute, I think it was called, university came out with it here in Canada, showing that basically systemic racism does not exist anywhere near the levels they think they do. And they went through all the different ethnic groups and genders and showed that those who we say are at the top are not nowhere near the top. And it's open source code. What do these people do and how do you wish to do it? The problem is that makes you look in the mirror and go, why am I not doing it? And nobody wants to look in the mirror anymore.
But I still don't understand, like that made me make sense why, somebody suffering in Gaza would be angry. It doesn't make sense why, the white Harvard student is angry. Like that. I think that is just captured by this wanting to be part of.
I think they teach them like empathy is like the highest form. So they're just trying to be like extra empathetic. And at that age, you're very ideologically passionate.
Right. It's funny though.
And you've seen the whole kerfuffle with Harvard this week and last week, I guess we're up to 3 weeks now, with the accusations of anti-Semitism and how they were not doing much to stop the rallies on campus. Did you see that sort of testimony in the States?
Oh, I saw the testimony like talking about
I forget the lady's name.
Marsha Gay or something.
Claudine Gay, I believe. So she's of Harvard. There was the MIT and the Penn State presidents.
Right.
And basically they all did the exact same song and dance. Like we allow a wide breadth of free speech on campus, and we only actually do anything when it's actionable. Really. So if someone doesn't use pronouns, where's our stance?
Yo, it's complete hypocritical.
So they raise the bar on some things and lower the bar on the other. And the accusation is that's anti-Semitism because you are deliberately turning a blind eye to hate speech.
Yeah, no, it's, I mean, this is, the hypocrisy is
So that's how it gets into university campuses. And they're all repeating it. These are all the presidents. So imagine the trickle-down effect into the faculty and then into everyone else, right? The students and whatnot, the student body. And it becomes just a way of living. They just, back when we were in school, didn't you kind of just feel like university was separate from the actual living world?
Right. Yeah, I did.
You're in your own little ecosystem. Movies are coming out, part 2 of this movie, part 3. Like what? I didn't even catch part 1 yet. Like you were in your own little bubble.
Right.
And that's an interesting point. I think universities are some of the most bubble-esque institutions you can have within a country. Sure, which is why you want to really infiltrate them because they are the next generation of movers and shakers, leaders for your country.
Yeah, right. Like and I mean, sort of by design, like you're supposed to have the freedom of thought and like scientific freedom and everything in these institutions. It's what sort of breeds like, great new scientists and great new ideas. But
unless you're trying to suppress them and make the West fall. Now, guess who's the biggest donor of American universities? I believe.
Yeah, it's like Qatar or something.
Yeah, I think it was 4.3 billion.
Yeah.
Guess where the Hamas leadership lives?
Right.
Not in Gaza. Right. In Qatar. I call it Qatar.
Yeah, you know what, I have heard both Qatar and
Yeah,
Qatar seems like it would be.
I think in English we say Qatar. I think they say
they
Qatar.
say Qatar.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Fair enough. But
It's
my
Kiev
point
and
it's
Kyiv.
yeah. Ukrainian version versus
Chicken
Russian.
Kyiv.
Yeah. Russian chicken fillet.
Right.
But at any rate, that's a brilliant game plan now. So they don't live there. They live in Qatar. Qatar then funds universities. And now, have you seen the financial state of Canadian and American universities? Bleeding money like hell.
Right.
Now, how on earth in Canada, when you and I went to university and we had a 26 million population, and now and university was much cheaper, and now we got a 40 million plus population, universities far more, and they're losing money?
Inflation.
Well, not because they're badly run. And so when you're creating all these new diversity, inclusion, and equity faculties, the bureaucracy is not getting smaller. It's getting larger and larger and larger. So when you import wokeism into the university and your bureaucracy expands around such thing and your payroll has to expand, you're more beholden to whoever's going to donate money. They got you. And now you're addicted. It's like being addicted to a heroin or the next booster. They're addicted to the next payment from abroad, right? Because if not, their faculties, their institution's going to collapse. But that payment is only going to come if they keep spewing the type of rhetoric that will please the donors.
But I would say that, what is it, 4.3 billion or something?
Yeah, I believe that's
so.
What
is that donated to every? Like, I wonder what percentage of that.
Yeah.
So, for example, University of Toronto, how much of that money are they getting?
And
how much is that? American, what percentage of this is of their total?
Whatever it is, in Canadian context, they're losing money. So they're going to need every dollar they can. But in a Canadian context, they get huge. Like in the States too, when you go to become a professor and you get interviewed, one of the main questions is, if we take you on as a professor here at this institution, how do you plan to secure funding?
Yeah.
It is literally part of your resume, part of your interview process. So they're all about the cash. And in Canadian case, it's going to be things like big pharma. We're not going to research whether iodine can help protect you against COVID if you use a nasal spray. Like, where's the money in that? We want to have research on how many boosters is optimum.
Yeah.
Right? So the money skews the research, which can then skew the whole ideological concept of the institution, which then changes how the kids come out of said institutions, which changes voting behavior.
Well,
for the first time, sorry to cut you off, but for the first time in 20, 25 years, I would say Israel's stability in the Middle East does not look anywhere near as strong as I thought it was. Because if Americans give up support on them, and the less money pours in, and if American support is attached to the next generation of voters who are far more pro-Palestinian than pro-Israeli, what does the future hold for them?
It's pretty scary because it really is. I mean, for Israel, first of all, for Jews worldwide, but also for the West, because that's our foothold. Like, there's nothing else in the Middle East that we have.
Do you know how many Arab states there are? 23.
Yeah.
Do you know how many Jewish states there are? 1.
Right.
That's not easy numbers. And they're like 7-8 million people versus 100 to 200 million Arabs.
Yeah.
You know, so this whole idea that they're this strong, yes, they probably have nukes and a well-trained army. All that stuff ages.
Yeah.
You know, if you have like in the 1900s Russian military, but the world passes you by, if you're not updating it constantly, you're going to fall behind.
It all depends on America. This is why it's such a crucial what's happening in our schools and what's happening in American and Western politics is really important. It is really important who's going to win the next election in the States and what direction that country is going to take. I don't think we really have.
Is intellectual thought becoming more mature with the way we teach kids, or less mature? More nuanced or less nuanced?
For sure, less.
Right. So are they going to understand all these complexities that we can't even get into in a podcast here today? They're not going to know. They'll be like, oppressor, oppressed, easy. Tinder, swipe left, swipe right, done.
Right.
Good guy, bad guy. White hat, black hat.
And I don't think you even need to get into like the Qatar, like sort of funding these institutions. I think that it breeds itself. Like, I think that's just the culture
you
we
just
live
get
in
the
now.
push.
Like,
yes. Well, that's the magic of it. It's like software that gets installed and you don't even know how it got installed.
Yeah.
Culturally, like it gets installed into the culture.
Yeah.
Okay, so did you see this? There was an MIT study that came out talking about the institutions and everything, creating a link between Islamophobia and climate change. This is where we are.
Yeah. That's
what are you going to say about that? Like, is this we're not educating people properly anymore. Like it's all indoctrination,
Yeah.
like a religion based around some sort of pseudo altruism, because ultimately I think you're weakening people and weakening society. You know, we really lost that sort of like that thing that got us here, that, I don't know, like the optimal amount of pressure. Now we're all about like kind of, you know, like we would say helicopter parents. Now we got like helicopter society.
Yeah.
Like just
Yeah.
blow everything out. Life's going to be okay.
When you elevate victimhood to the status of a virtue, like, and this is what's been happening over the years. Like, this is what this
Who doesn't want to
breeds.
be more virtuous?
Right. So you have this, you know, and when everything's boiled down to simple dichotomies, like you have like it's either skin colors, like white is bad, like colonizer, like colonize, like it's
And when you have to make quick decisions on your phone, you know, the more visually, the more victimhood you can bake into your photo or your meme, the more your social status is going to increase.
right. Yeah.
But going back, sorry to cut you off.
Yeah. Just
you know, I saw this amazing quote in a sense, and I'll read it first, and I'll tell you who it was. Like, and it goes to just the generation and technology and what technology does to our minds. And it goes like this: we have a deficit of wonder. When I ask people a question, they get out their phone, and I say, no, I don't want to know the answer. I just want to wonder about it for a while. That was from Tom Waits.
Huh. Yeah.
And like, you know, I find that all the time. Like, I'll have a question with somebody. Like, well, let me just Google that. Let me find what this is.
It drives me crazy.
Leave me.
Yeah.
First of all, you're going down Plato's cave. You don't know what the hell you're looking at, and you're getting a little snapshot of something that's curated for you. You think you've searched for it because you've typed it into the search box. You're not getting some random selection of all the information on Earth at all.
Yeah.
It's completely curated. And you have actually taken the most precious thing out of the equation. I want to know what you think about this. Not what you went and read and come back and spit it back to me like a robot. Yeah. You've completely just taken you out of the equation.
Yeah, and even I would even say for simple things. Even if sometimes I'll be talking with somebody and I'll be like, oh, who's the actor that was in blah 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 movie or whatever, and they'll immediately want to go just check, like Google it and find out who it is, and it's like you're also taking your thought process out of the equation. Like it is a healthy thing to remember, you know, like to put it together in your mind and come back with an answer. Like think about what it was.
You might be the next Mozart. You know, like, right. but every person has an amazing ability to give me a point of view that I've never thought of before. When I take those people out of the equation, I'm getting far more centralized data.
Yeah.
And they don't even know they're doing it.
And it's only going to get worse. And I know
before it gets better.
Well, I don't know if it's like, I mean, again, with the AI, it's like, how is it going to, like, how is this going to, like, when is going to be the point where, like, how does AI shift in such a way that we have less centralization? Like, I just don't see it.
No, but maybe we learn to utilize AI better. Like, we just have to have like, you know, in school, like we learned how to, you know, you're absolutely right. I had a client tell me the other day, she went to go to the Toronto Reference Library. So for those who don't know, it's a wonderful library we have in downtown Toronto that you don't actually take out the books. They're all there on the shelf, right? And so everything's there 24/7, and it's just an amazing institution. And she went in there and she went in to do some research for her daughters who's in university and couldn't get back to Toronto to get this particular book. And she went up to the front clerk, and the clerk goes, well, I can't help you right now. The computers are down. And she's like, well, can you just give me like the Dewey, I know the Dewey Decimal System. If you just give me the number, I can go upstairs and find it myself. And the young clerk was like, what?
All right.
You can find the book on your own in here?
Yeah.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
So yeah, there you go. Like we've lost an ability, like caveman not knowing how to make fire, right? And she's like, dude, it's just a Dewey Decimal System.
Right. Well, it's amazing. And you feel, and you wonder how, it's like, okay, well, obviously AI can replace whatever that person's job is, because they are essentially just a surrogate for AI at this point. They're just like turning a computer
on. Are
on.
we not, when we look at our phones, just a surrogate for like centralized information when we simply Google something and come back and spit it out and don't put yourself into it at all?
Yeah.
None of your own thought. You're just a surrogate.
Right.
You've eliminated thought on Earth, not increased it.
Sometimes I'm concerned, even when we have this podcast, like I'm always careful that I don't just regurgitate things I've listened to on other podcasts. Like I'm like, okay, how can, you know, what do I think about this? Try to take it into consideration. And we've talked about this before. Like I try to get news from different sources. So I'm like, there's a little bit of you get the other side. But, you know, it really is important to kind of think about how it all is put together yourself in really a lot of things that you do. And the more you're doing it, the more you're exercising your mind, even if it's just for something simple, the better, like, don't use Waze. Maybe just like when you're driving somewhere, like just remember where you go or try a different route and figure it out. Like it's not, use the stars. Like, I don't know. Like we've become way too dependent already on this.
Where the beauty is in that though, is that when you allow yourself to get lost in the road a bit and figure it out. And part of the beauty of our podcast is that, yes, we come with, like, we've done some research, looked at both sides. Again, I'm like, I don't want to sound like any other podcast, but the beauty is it never really does, because as we start talking, it just naturally turns into something else.
Right, because it's two people talking and it's not two...
And we're adding ourselves into the mix. Exactly. Right. We're not just simply, well, you got your notes, I got my notes, here we go. So we can just upload that and it's over, right? So it's leaving that space for the individual human interaction and encouraging it, which is the way we'll learn to utilize AI in the future to a benefit. But it really comes back to education. Yeah. So even though this podcast today was supposed to be more about like the Middle East, and I'm sure we'll get back to it a bit, but I think the problem that we're highlighting now with the Middle East is a problem of education.
Yeah.
Both in the Middle East, on both, you can say on the Israeli and Palestinian terms, and different, they know different things about each other, and how those things are represented in institutions supporting those two sides globally. Yeah, and I mean, I almost want to let's parse some of this so that we're not trying to, solve all the world's problems. Like the Middle East is one thing. What we do know is the West, and I know the country I grew up in. I know, what our values are supposed to be, and there's no way that people should be. Like the fact that, over 50% of a poll is in favor of sort of the genocide of the Jews, I mean, that is reprehensible. Like there's no nuance to that. But do you know where some of the dumb stuff is coming in? So when you have those, you've seen those signs, Free Palestine, right? That presupposes, just like Stop the Hate and all these different campaigns that come out, right? It's or BLM, and it creates this non-combative slogan. Are you against freedom? Are you against the oppressed? Right. How can you not be for free Palestine? Yeah. But it presupposes that there was even a Palestine to be freed. Right. It's baked into the word. There was never been a country called Palestine. There's never been a king of Palestine. There's never been a prime minister of Palestine. So but when you hear free Palestine and you don't know history, yes, we need to free these people. Right. Now I'm going back. Remember in our more era, free Tibet. I didn't go deep back then. I was just a young 20-year-old. I'm yeah, absolutely. These poor people up there who are spiritual in the mountains being oppressed by the Chinese regime. I'm all in on them. And I think I'm kind of right still. But the truth is, be told, at 21 years of age in pre-internet years, I wasn't doing much research about it. Right. Or East Timor. Remember that one? Where it was yes. I didn't know. All I knew it was kind of cool to not want East Timor to be I didn't even know who they were being subjugated by. So we got a double whammy here, because it really is something that is more aggravated in one's youth, and also then in naivety of just not having true knowledge, right? Well, as you get older and you have more knowledge, those two things really help rectify it. Yeah. But it's the lack of I'm going to say lack of experience, but I think there's something just interesting about being 21 and wanting to shape the world in a better more ideologically aligned, this is our time and we need to shape it in our kind of way, right? There's a certain rebellious nature vibe to that age group, and you factor in that they had know less about the world than ever before, and they want to be altruistic 24/7. It's a disaster. It is, and there's some part of me that is a little sympathetic there, because when we were growing up, I made a lot of stupid, I didn't know, I was quite into rebelling against certain causes or whatever, but it wasn't. I remember your T-shirt in 1993. What? Don't acid rain on my parade. Yeah. But there's. If we were at this, we'd be like, well, what do you mean? What about the industries? And what does that mean? Is it really global? And how bad is this acid rain? Yeah. And have you ever, I know. Yeah, but it was the most amazing shirt to wear at that age. Right, yeah. Yeah, you're like, of course you're against acid rain. Are you pro acid rain? Oh, you like acid rain. Yeah. But we didn't have the microscope. We weren't under the microscope of these people. These people tearing down these pictures that are now circulating on the internet, they'll never be able to rid themselves of. These people's lives will be tarnished. And imagine the psychological damage if we were for those people 20, 30 years from now, when they're the ones walking around New York when they say missing Israelis, and they're tearing down the signs off the street poles.
Yeah.
And they see that picture of themselves 20 years on, and they go, what the fuck did I do?
Yeah, and they're not going to be getting certain jobs. Like, I mean, and they're
Well,
like,
I don't encourage that, but you're right. That might play into, or might get
Well,
certain
it
jobs.
will be.
Depends who wins this war, you know.
I guess,
but
but
when they come to that reckoning and they see, like, you're seeing your stupidity. Like we had the advantage of being younger, and letting our mistakes happen in privacy.
Yeah.
If these are truly mistakes, and the future will tell. But if they're truly mistakes, they don't have their privacy.
Well, I think you can even say now that a lot of them are mistakes. I mean, these people, like the vast majority of these people protesting and tearing down pictures, I really think like are doing it because it's like the cool thing to do. So like at what level are these people going to be, I think for the rest of their lives, or certainly for the next like 10 years, they're going to have a tough time maybe getting jobs because their names will be out there, their faces will be out there, our technology is converging.
They might get a job in
university
universities though. Like, you know, it becomes this really like almost two-tier society. You know, you're on one team A or team B.
Yeah, but I think that as you, I mean, look,
Call themselves an activist.
When I saw that, my natural inclination is to be like, good, I hope they don't get jobs. Like, I was happy to see that bus going around with showing all the names of the people who were like, you know, tearing down the pictures or putting out at the protest. But part of me is like, okay, like I was young too. I said some stupid things. Like, who knows what? I don't know. I think kids need to grow up a lot faster now in some ways, and unfortunately, they're staying young much longer because of the technology. Really, like that's at the end of the day. I think that's what it comes down to. They're
imagine too, going back to Gaza now, and I would argue it's not an open air prison because. Have you seen the population growth of Gaza in the last 15 years? It's like exponential.
Yeah.
So usually when you're an apartheid state and you're in a prison, having babies is something that comes, I mean, one can argue when the poorer you get, the more babies you have. But in general, we're not talking about sub-Saharan Africa here. We're talking about they're right next to Israel. You know,
right.
I don't want to say relatively modern, but they're in the game. Sort of in the Western sphere a little bit.
Well, I don't know if they have the infrastructure, but like
they have some. It's not as bad as it looks in some places. Have you seen like this whole open air and you see like beautiful resorts by the waterfront and whatnot, like in universities and mosques and highways, you know?
I don't know, you know, like I've never been to Gaza and I don't think, I mean,
there's KFC, like there's stuff like that there.
Okay.
So I don't know how
KFC.
Yeah, you know, good old capitalism. But imagine though, going back to just like, you know, more global thing, if they didn't have control of their own money. But what if they were on like a CBDC?
Yeah.
And literally like either more because of their victimhood or less because the oppressor says you don't get it.
Right.
Like that's the kind of stuff I want to, if this is a microcosm of what we can see happening on Earth, you have to always imagine these controls, these powers, not in the hands of the leaders you enjoy, but in the hands of the worst leaders. And so that's the kind, I don't see anything, going back to point, leading to a decentralization. You know, there's a reason why I never really understood when like right-wingers were like, oh, you know, we're so into Jesus. And I would hear the argument, well, the people on the left should be more into it because it's more social good and freedom and openness and lack of racism and all that sort of stuff. Turn the other cheek. Like those are things that the left typically was home to those ideas. But there's a key difference. And tell me what do you think of this? But Jesus, in the way he's thinking, was actually quite individually based, the way he approached things. It's like, I don't need this synagogue to tell me I talk to God directly, one-on-one. And so can you. You don't need this middleman. Yeah. And that's very much a right-wing thing.
Yeah,
like you can less government, less middleman. You have your own, what do you call it? Like freedom to make your own choices and live by the sword, die by the sword. Yeah. And if you make the wrong choices, well, it's on you. Yeah. Those are very much like an adult way of thinking in a sense, you know? Yeah. And going back to this stuff in the world, I just feel like it's going in the opposite direction where we're like looking for more centralization and more bureaucracy to solve our ills instead of putting it on the individual. And in this case, how much of the conversation on the news have you put the blame on the people in Gaza for their own situations? Not much. Very little. Yeah. Very, very little. Mm-hmm. It's like, well, you have this collective power that's against you and you have no agency over it and you this and no. I you know what? there's got to be a sense of a lack of personal responsibility is bleeding into all aspects, starting at the top of our own leaders.
Yeah. I think that a lot of the problem here is a numbers game. I since this happened, I've gone to a synagogue twice and something called a Chabad house. I don't know if you know. It's like kind of a small little community, like a Jewish community, and you kind of sit around. There's a rabbi, and you talk about, like, you have food together, and you just talk about like stuff. And so,
see how wonderful is that? So you're inserting you into the
that's
mix.
right. That's right. I'm not, and they're like, I'm not Jewish, but it's like you're welcomed or whatever.
Yep.
And I just wanted to see what it was all about. Like what, and
Would you ever consider becoming Jewish?
Well, I'm just not. So,
Do you have a problem with becoming Jewish?
well, I don't have a problem with becoming it. I just don't. I'm not. Like, to me, it doesn't really. I don't know. Like, I'm not really like I do believe in God, but I'm kind of, I guess, a little bit more like Jesus in the sense that I feel like I've got like the direct taught line. Like I don't.
Yeah.
Not in a real way, but in a symbolic way. Like I don't. I do pray and I believe in God and everything like that, but I don't necessarily, like, I find religions interesting.
But you could argue that having a religion helps organize your spiritual thoughts.
For sure. And I think
Otherwise,
it's
it's
important
just
to worship.
randomness.
I think the community behind it and the worship aspect of it, like knowing there's something bigger than yourself and getting together and literally doing something
And
to
the structure
instantiate
of
that
the
is
religion
important.
can help organize you.
Yeah. So I think, if I was irreligious, if I didn't, because I'm Catholic, so I sort of already have all that and I know what to do and all the things. So it's like I already got my religion.
Rabbi, I already got all that. I'm Catholic, man.
But I did think it was interesting to see it, and I thought, like, it really, everybody comes together. They're very, there are people that really kind of takes care of one another.
There
Like,
you go.
like
Is it a secret?
Is what a secret?
What they're doing? It's open source.
Yeah. No, it's open source.
It's open source.
But I think what it is they don't have the numbers, so they don't have. Like, it literally was because of the Holocaust and, and what happened in the Soviet Union and everything like that the numbers are so reduced, right? Like, there's millions and millions of people. So all those millions of people that were going to have children, because they're a culture that has a lot of children. And I don't know if it's because of the Holocaust, but so you would think that there'd be a lot more of them, but there really isn't. And I think it's because of the Holocaust and, like, these mass killings. Like, because you think, like, with the population, even
so you're saying they have the great game plan, they don't have the numbers.
They don't have the numbers at the moment, and
but
that's when
it's not bringing it back to Israel versus Gaza in a sense that they have the game plan, but they're just one Jewish state with 23 Arab states. Mm-hmm. So they're playing an excellent game in a sense with reduced cards.
Right. So
if they had the numbers, if there was 12 and 12 states facing off, it'd be no contest.
Right. Well, it's
not that I wish that. I don't make it because they skew it as a war, like this mega war sort of thing.
But even from a PR
but doing
perspective,
more with less is a wonderful thing.
For sure it is. But you look at like so all these kids who are sort of joining the club of like Free Palestine, everything like this on college campuses. There's just a lot more people that they can kind of like be friends with or in the clique with. Like there's not a lot of Jewish organizations, and that Jewish people also aren't out like. Trying to get recruits or anything, right? So it's like they're fairly insulated, and like so you have. I think that unfortunately harms them in any kind of PR campaign. There's just not enough of them. Yeah. So
the only way you can defeat that is with time, and those kids grow up and see and learn and live a little bit more. Like I don't see anyone in North America like willing to say, you know what, take that Israeli soldier, hostage out of Hamas. I'll take their place because Hamas is really good and they're just freedom fighters.
Right.
Do you really believe that?
Yeah.
Okay, go switch positions with that Israeli person in there now.
Yeah.
Because that's who you're supporting, right? You're supporting the guy holding that guy there. Well, then, let him go back home to your family and you go sit there, because that's the guy you're saying he's doing a great job. Go.
Yeah.
Nobody will actually do that. They're all full of shit, Jake. They have their ideal.
Yeah.
Their idealism is, when you say like love is blindness, well, they're in love with this ideal.
Yeah. And it's interesting how you really, to change the narrative, like people are so married to their bloody narratives, like people are just not open to it. You can't have a conversation. You were talking earlier about being blocked on Twitter, and it's like, you make like people just aren't interested in anything that challenges how they already see the world. You're the enemy, and there's no sense in talking.
I went to a pro-Palestinian ex Twitter account, and I wanted to start a conversation starting with the most baseline question, like where can I build from?
Yeah.
So my baseline question to open was, do you agree Israel should be a country? I got death threats.
Yeah.
From Canadians.
Yeah.
I actually reported to Twitter and they said, okay, we've blocked a person until they take that tweet down and whatever, you know.
Huh. Yeah.
Like, you know, like seriously, asking in Canada, should Israel be a country? And then when I went into the actual profiles of a lot of people that were saying stuff, I'm getting the Kalashnikovs and the Balaklavas or the BLM Ukrainian rainbow flag crowd.
Yeah.
Like it was really like the woke people and the militants that were completely one.
Yeah.
I'm like, I'm just asking, like, really, guys. So if you don't even agree that Israel should be a country, who's against a two-state solution? The one who doesn't want Israel to be a country.
And again, you know, this comes back to like when you put it all together, it's like, what should Israel do? They should go in and they should occupy Gaza. They should like, there's no way, like, first of all, going in there and just bombing it and like doing this is just creating more terrorists as usual. So it's like, go in, take it over, and just that's it.
That would be quick and efficient, but it's just not the right way to do things. But I understand.
But I think it has to be. It's like, haven't they tried everything else? Like,
they have tried
the
a lot. I don't see another. Yes, I agree. You're an avid chess player. Isn't there a move in chess that no matter what you do, you're doomed? Is there like a situation if every move you go to make only lead to a worse position?
There's a stalemate, maybe is what you're thinking of, where it's just it's a tie.
Yeah, there's no one like every. So I feel like Israel right now, no matter what move they make, is only going to make things worse. If they don't do something, you didn't react. If you overreact, you overreact.
Oh yeah.
Right? They're trapped right now. But yes, to your point, if you were to ask me honestly, do I see the mindset in the Gazan Strip and West Bank changing sufficiently for Israel to back away and say, now you guys can run your countries beside us in harmony? I don't see that ever happening in my lifetime. And I'm a diehard optimist. I just don't. And having Greek background, I kind of understand a little bit of the passion nuanced, like the idealism, and that what it means when your parents told you something from your youth and your grandparents told your parents something. It's really hard to break away.
Is that the Turkey? Or are you talking about?
Well, just in general, like the Mediterranean countries are so family oriented, you know, like you in a tyrannical sort of way that you're not going to be able to break ranks with your parents very easily. And if you do, it might mean breaking ranks with your relationship with your parents.
Right.
Which who's going to want to do that? And then that will also bleed into society at large. So who's going to break away from this mind virus that's infected these two places?
Right.
So I don't see it happening. So to your point, something dramatic has to happen, or you're going to have a long 200 to 300 year stalemate.
Yeah.
Which nobody really wants. And another thing, if you were to, talking about the right mindset on earth, if you were to magically take all the Palestinians out of Gaza and import now all Israelis into there, in 25 years, how would that place turn out? Like a ghetto? Tell me the precedent for that.
Yeah.
It wouldn't.
It would be quite nice.
So is it the resources? Is it the surrounding neighbors that are around you? No, it's the way you're running your country. So has Israel been heavy-handed? Sure, maybe, yes. You have to ask yourself, why though? Right? But once you get through all that sort of nuance, because that's what happens in Twitter. Well, you did X, then they did Y, and you're like,
right.
Can we get to the why?
Yeah,
like why did this actually happen? What are the causes of this? How do you get out of this? Otherwise, you're just going through like a 12-round boxing match, looking at below versus below, as opposed to what brought you into the match to begin with, and how the hell do you get out of this match? It's all about mindset, and I am going to tell you, the Middle East has 100% the wrong mindset for the 21st century.
Yeah, a lot of countries in there do, and yeah, I mean, also I would say like with the Palestinian situation, I think this isn't Israel's problem anymore. Like this is like if other Arab states want to absorb that population, they should do it. It's like enough is enough. It really is not a 21st century.
Egypt doesn't want them because the whole brotherhood, Muslim brotherhood, that's Palestinian based, isn't it? I believe it is. So they're like, we don't want these guys back in our country because we just got rid of that crap. Okay. So inside Gaza, 50% of the people who live there are of Egyptian descent. You can tell by their last names. You know, they're not the same type of Arabs. Then you have, do you know about in 1991, the Kuwaiti War, there was 300,000 Palestinians living in Kuwait.
Oh, and they...
Iraq attacks Kuwait. Guess what side the Palestinians sided on? The Iraqis. So the Kuwait's like, fuck you, and they kicked them all out.
Yeah.
Then you got Jordan, which was Transjordan. For a while, about 20, 30 year period, the entire West Bank was part of Jordan. And then the Palestinians that were living there had their own army inside Jordan. And they went to war, civil war against the Jordanian army. Okay.
Yeah.
So eventually the Jordanians kicked them out, but in the process, I think the Palestinians in the West Bank did manage to kill the king or the prime minister at the time too. So it was a serious war. So when it came to the 1967 attack, now Israel, what were they going to do? They weren't going to occupy West Bank. Jordan doesn't want them back. They're like, we're happy to see you guys leave, right? So now if you don't occupy it, what's to stop them from voting in a Hamas and lobbing rockets right from next door? You literally have to occupy it in order to keep the peace. And proof of that is the average person in the West Bank lives a much better life than the average person in the Gaza Strip. So even under occupation, but from a more civilizing, albeit sometimes heavy-handed force, the average person there lives a better life than in the Gaza Strip.
Yeah.
And then you got Hezbollah, which is Palestinian. Like, nobody wants these people back.
Yeah. And it's
not the people, sorry to cut you off,
Yeah.
because I want people to understand, because they don't really know me or you intimately.
Yeah.
It's not the people. It's the mind virus that's taken over their cultures. And how do you
Sure.
get rid of it? You literally have to just get rid of it.
Yeah, I mean, they're taught, it's the same as any other. I'm sure you go to North Korea and they all, well, I'm sure there's a good number of them that actually do revere their leader, right? And there's like no reason they should.
Silence grows in, tyranny grows in silence.
Right.
And what you're having now is Hamas, because they've silenced everybody for this cultural hellscape they've created. No one's speaking up again. And when it's first started, I was very careful to delineate between Palestinians, support for Palestinians, and support for Hamas. Like, they're not the same thing. But have you seen one pro-Palestinian, anti-Hamas rally in the last 3 months?
Yeah, right. No,
It doesn't
I haven't.
happen.
Yeah.
So, and then you start seeing polls, 70% of people in Gaza support Hamas. Like,
Yeah.
I can't differentiate to any effective degree.
Yeah.
So, like, fuck off. What are you doing, guys?
Well, yeah, and there's of course always outliers. There's always people who don't, like,
Of course.
But it's
course.
like, even in Canada, it's like, how many people did vote in Justin Trudeau, that he's the representative of the country, right? But it's like a lot of the country doesn't want him there. So it's, you look at Gaza and it's like, or Gaza. And it's the other, it's the same thing where I'm sure there are people there that feel, tyrannized by
Of course.
Hamas.
Afraid to speak out. But they inevitably, they have to find it themselves.
Yeah. Yeah.
You can't expect, it's like us, America, going in and like bombing Iraq and trying to bring them democracy. They have to want it themselves.
And enough of them have to want it. And otherwise it's like, move out of, really at some point it's like you have to go somewhere else, or you're part of the problem. Like, it's like when Israel is trying to move people to other parts of the country, which I don't understand that strategy. But to kind of get them out of the way of the bombings, it's like, how many times, I mean, I get that it's not easy. You just uproot your family and you go somewhere else, but it's like, at some point, at some level, aren't you like, maybe we shouldn't be living here? Maybe we should be figuring out something else to.
Have you heard of this statement before? And I don't fully agree with it because it's a little overly simplified, but the Palestinians will have peace when they learn to love their children more than they hate Jews.
Right. Yeah.
It's a little oversimplified. But there's got to be a reckoning where, like, you know what? Let bygones be bygones. We just need to stop the killing and move forward now.
Did you hear that, like, ecstatic call that Hamas, the Hamas terrorist made to his parents? What he called them, and he was in the middle of like
killed 10
them.
people with my own bare hands.
Did you hear the ecstasy in his voice?
Yes.
Like, that's, I mean, and his parents sounded a little like kind of dumbfounded almost, but it's like, that's the fervor. Like, I don't know if that's just Hamas or if that's like something, but there's a baseline of that in the education system there, where it's like, the Jews are the bad guys. Like, you know what I mean? Like, until they've
killed the devil.
Right.
He's Odysseus and descended down into the cave and, slain the dragon sort of thing. And now, how do you imagine that's someone that's more vocal about it? So going back to my family element, how does the average person in Gaza break away from their parents' mindset?
Right.
When literally you have extreme examples like that one.
Yeah, I don't know.
And you know what? I look at these little images and I see these kids, and I'm like, they just want a PlayStation. They just want McDonald's. They just want to have a nice life. They want to fall in love, and they're literally being taken over by this mind virus. And it's not to say that Israel does everything right. No country does. Welcome to Earth, But if you were queer and you wanted to live in the Middle East, which country are you picking?
Right.
Right? It's the second largest tech hub in the world.
The country that allows you to protest for the rights of queer people.
Yeah.
And
it's the second largest tech hub in the world.
Yeah.
Next door to an open air like prison, let's call it. Like, really? You know what? Why don't you just make peace and try to work with it instead of working against it?
Yeah.
Even if it's off, like work with it, work with these people. I don't know. And then you hear reports like when they came across the 30-ish thousand daily people that came across the border there to work in Israel from Gaza, the temporary workers, that some of them had mapped out the entire neighborhoods and knew how many people lived in each house and were feeding that information back to the Hamas military.
Yeah.
Like, you know what? Like, seriously?
Yeah.
Like, how is the average person ever supposed to, in Israel, forgive and feel about the people in Gaza?
Yeah. If I was in Israel and this had happened to me, even if I was a supporter before I believed in a two-state solution, I'm pretty sure I'd be pretty militant against that now.
In Israel, like if the 1,200 or so people that were killed, pretty much every family knows somebody, like the degrees of separation, who was murdered in that. You think they're not going to be able to let go of that anger?
Yeah.
Like that's going to be really hard. This is where the mind virus on both sides locks in a little bit.
Right.
And you got to untangle that. And I don't know if you know this, but inside Israel proper, there's about 1.5 million to 2 million Arabs that live with full rights.
Yeah. Yeah. I had heard.
They become Supreme Court judges there. One of them, an Arab Israeli Supreme Court judge, was the judge in charge of the case that put the former Israeli prime minister into jail. So you're talking apartheid state?
Well, how many Jews are in Gaza?
You know how many there were, though? And they forcibly removed them in 2007, I believe. The IDF went in and ripped them out, saying, we can't protect you here anymore.
Right.
And that home of yours, no more. You have to leave.
Yeah.
So if you want to talk about extermination of people out of a region, there's far more Palestinians living in Israel than Jewish people living in Gaza. Furthermore, have you ever seen the numbers of the surrounding Arab states?
In terms of
how many Jewish people live there? They all had significant Jewish populations, and they all don't anymore.
Yeah.
So who's getting obliterated from the surrounding regions? And where else do you think they're going to go? They're going to go to Israel, right? Because they literally have one country in the region.
Yeah, yeah.
So that's why when people go like, oh, this is anti-Zionism, that's just, for me, a large part of it, maybe not all, is really just anti-Semitism. Because they're willing to overlook, Greece, I have some interesting numbers here I had written down, but it's not insignificant. Okay, so we have 1 million Uyghurs in China are put into concentration camps. Do you see people protesting about these million people? I don't. They're Muslim, right? Nobody's talking about them. We have...
Well, to be fair, there have been... that is something that is brought up with... there's not mass protests to the extent that
not at the universities,
now.
though.
Right. On government levels, you do see some protests.
Okay, what about the 1 million Afghans that are being deported out of Pakistan back to Afghanistan?
Right.
1 million of them.
Yeah.
Doesn't even make the news. You got Yemen and Saudi Arabia bombing the hell out of each other. What are we at, 500,000 deaths or something? That's Muslim versus Muslim. Nobody's saying anything. You got Kosovo, with Serbia. Kosovo being part of Albania, Muslim. Goes in and basically obliterates the Christian heartland of Serbia. That's their most religious zone, not a peep, right? You had, back in history, you had 1 million Greeks that were taken out of Turkey with the whole population exchange, going, well, we're going to have to draw the borders down a more normal line. This Ottoman Empire thing where you got 1 million on this side and 50,000 on this side, this is not going to work. Let's be realistic. Population exchange. Nobody says boo about that. You have so many, man. You have 1 million French were kicked out of Algeria in 1962. You go on. You got 1 million Syrian refugees that moved to Germany in 8 years ago. So my point is, nobody kicks off about these things, but when the Jewish people get involved, it all becomes oh, look at these bad people. What are they doing?
Yeah.
That's anti-Semitism, cloaked in anti-Zionism.
Yeah, I think that a lot of it has to do with technology now, social media, and again, just people wanting to be part of a club. I don't know, it's hard for me to really wrap my head around pure anti-Semitism. I just don't get what the hatred would be. For example, if you want to look at
Because it's there's an inner group that is not allowing you to succeed, and they're working against you 24/7.
But they aren't. That's the thing.
I know, but it makes it a lot easier to think that because it offloads. Again, it's kind of always our topic here. It offloads your personal responsibility onto some boogeyman.
But that's I guess it just doesn't resonate with me. If you look at for example black crime statistics, I can see how people would look at that and be like, wow, I don't like black people, because it's disproportionately black people commit most of the crime, and you just seeing a statistic like that, you can be like, well, there's at least a kernel of why I can understand why somebody would be racist against black people. But And against Muslims, I can understand that racism because it's like, well, we had the 9/11 terror attacks. It seems like most terror attacks around the world seem to be caused by Muslim terrorists. So like there's easy connections to make where it's like you can at least see where there would be. I'm not saying like like Islamophobia or anything is a good thing, or being against black people is. I'm not saying any of that is good, but at least I can understand the connection.
Each one's a little different. Like Islamophobia is literally the fear of Islam, right? Anti-Semitism is like I'm against Semites. I think it's a different energy. And a little bit the Islamophobia I think creeps into I think we have never really had our reckoning, and we certainly weren't taught it in school. But when the Eastern Roman Empire, because like Rome, when people talk about Rome, when did it collapse? Like, somewhere there in the 300s.
How does Rome make it into every single one of these podcasts?
Dude, I don't know. But it collapsed like in I think it was 1453 with the fall of the Constantinople. That was literally the direct lineage of Caesar and Augustus and everybody else. So who took over the West's key point? The Ottoman Empire.
Right.
So this is where you get, I think, a little bit of Islamophobia, because it's like our number one spiritual and military and political base was wiped out and we never got it back. So there's this creeping fear of it coming in, but everybody's afraid to really verbalize it and why. Anti-Semitism works differently. I think it's more from, so I think people can see, although it may be changing, that Islamophobia is more like an external pressure coming in, kind of like an invading force. And that's where we get the mass immigration, all that sort of, it's like an invading force kind of motif. But the anti-Semitism is something a little bit more like it's baked into your culture. So it's more around you all the time. It could be in your media, that's what the way we would view it, or in your banking system or in your politics. It's literally part of the core of your country.
Right.
Which, again, if you want to get deep, is probably a little bit of the Jewish tribes moving throughout Europe and in part of the larger empires, really doing well and integrating themselves in a tight level. And that's created a weird type of can't point my finger at it because it's part of the country I live in fear. It's hard to point at it. And for the most part, Jewish people look Caucasian. They can have very Caucasian-like names. You can't really point them out to the same degree you can point out a Muslim person in a hijab.
Right.
So I think that creates this sort of easy scapegoat boogeyman, which has no real, it has absolutely no, I'm just as dumbfounded by it as you, but that's how it creeps into people's subconsciousness in the West.
Yeah.
It's an easy scapegoat.
It's just
like the boogeyman you can never point at.
But it's been like centuries. You know what I mean? Like millennia. The people have been, like Jews have been.
But human faults are baked into being a human. It just repeats itself over and over.
Yeah.
I mean, I got my little nieces now, and I see their thought processes, and they're watching Christmas movies. I'm like, you guys all react the same way we did, So like just to, like the little Rudolph or stuff like that. I'm like, this is cute. You guys are just reacting, and it's really reminiscent of how I felt when I was 7 years old and I watched something. Well, when they get older, not they, but people that are of their age group get older, and they encounter difficulties in life, and they're looking to offload that responsibility. What the weaker mindset is going to do is point to anti-Semitism. I think you're a strong guy. I'm a strong person. And even if it was true, I wouldn't let it ever define me.
Right.
I think that's my key feature. It's a shitty world out there, but I'm not going to let the shittiness of the world define me.
Yeah.
Right. So to sit there and offload that problem is far too easy. But I think you're going to see a growing amount of that because we don't teach resilience enough anymore.
Right. Yeah, it all does come back to education. So, I guess, do you have anything else you want to say about this? I mean, it's a big issue, and like I said, there's a lot of it's been covered. It's just, I really think this thing is just such a rot in our society and really this is the manifestation of years of this woke bullshit that we've been dealing with. I really think that's a lot of it stems from there. That's why this stuff's going on in the Middle East has been going on for a while. But the stuff here where we have people openly calling for the genocide of the Jews or calling supporting a terrorist group like Hamas, like before Israel even invaded, I might add, like this is new, and this is like. It's scary. Like it is scary.
Woke is truly an Orwellian word because there's nothing actually awakened as it tries to indicate. There's nothing about that at all. It's funny. Like the Greek word for smart is exhypnos. You're smart, but hypnos, like hypnotic, is sleep. So when you're exhypnos, you're not asleep. You're Woke. Isn't that kind of interesting? I don't know if it plays into that or it's just something I kind of figured out one day on my own.
Yeah.
But it's like literally the opposite of what it's trying to portray. You are sleeping when you're woke. You think you're awake because you're using this word called woke, but it's actually designed to completely shut off any individual thought.
Right.
And it's bleeding into geopolitics. You could argue that taking pronouns, which is very much woke, the very act of bending at the knee, kissing the robe, what will it matter? Just do this little gesture and all will be forgiven. I won't ask anything more of you, most likely for the rest of your life. It's such a simple ask. Yeah. But that simple ask means you are allowing it, you're legitimizing the power above you. So I would argue that when you take pronouns, the butterfly clapping its wings causes a hurricane on the other side of the planet. Taking pronouns and allowing to say, I now kneel at the knee of wokeness, has geopolitical consequences.
Yeah.
Culminating in wars that could lead to World War III.
Yeah.
Because it's completely the mindset.
Yeah.
The woke crowd sees the Palestinians as the tip of the sword against Western colonization of the Middle East. Congrats. Wokeism has just supported terrorism. And it's unveiled its very authoritarian hand. Mm-hmm. So I don't know if I think we're really onto something here.
Yeah, it's
because it is authoritarian in nature.
Yeah,
and now it has really revealed itself by supporting terrorism,
and hopefully
because it's justifying it because it's the oppressed.
Yeah,
and that all starts because you take a pronoun. Like it literally is you can draw a direct line from A
and very
to
much
B.
the butterfly flapping its wings.
Yes,
yeah. But I think that this is hopefully this event will have galvanized. I think it has really woken people up in society that have otherwise just been sort of indifferent to this whole wokeism. And it's like, okay, I'll play the game like he, him, whatever.
Yeah. What do you have to lose? Just be nice to people.
I think it's maybe woken people up a little more to really what's been happening here, and maybe it's not such a great idea to bring in cultures that aren't fully assimilated. Like maybe diversity isn't a strength. You know what I mean? Like what a wild concept, or at least diversity.
You can have too much of a good thing of anything,
right?
For sure. And I think even immigrants who are just freshly here will completely agree with that. Mm-hmm. Maybe one of the key takeaways, though, is that we have to become very hyper aware of the small ask. Because it's the small ask that looks really benign that in reality won't stay benign for very long. I can really understand the sense now of how people in the USSR, Russia largely, fell for communism.
Yeah.
Because it was literally the most woke ideological event of the 20th century. It was the expert class telling the villagers, we're going to run things in a much more intelligent and equitable sort of way. Mm-hmm. Are you against intelligence? Are you against experts? Are you against equality? Right?
Yeah.
Like, so, or not so much equality, equity, right? Mm-hmm. Distributed from a top down or right, but they didn't know that. They just saw the beginning phase. It was benign.
Yeah.
And then once that gets installed and you've created this hierarchy which is centralized at the top, good luck breaking out of it. It'll take a revolution. Mm-hmm. Or complete bankruptcy of your state.
Yeah. Words really do have power, and when you wield them in such a way that you can define cultures and ideas and have people sort of bending the knee to almost gratuitous whims, like what you're achieving there isn't that they're then going to use the sort of correct pronouns going forward, but what you're achieving is the fact that they bent the knee at all, and that is really the first step in having a culture completely change.
We must become hyper aware of the small asks.
Yeah.
And it's okay to say no. Yes. Going back to the drug commercials, just say no.
Right.
There's something to it. Because again, it's a gateway drug. That one little spliff turns into heroin.
And this is maybe another show, but like it's hard to do that, right? Because you're talking about like in corporations, for example, it goes back to COVID. Like would I have and got the vaccine to save my job, that's, you get into those, where do you say no? Where do you draw the line?
Remember, like even Biden, this will be a winter of death if you don't get the shot.
Right.
What? At what point was that statistically true? And that came from the top down, and it was legitimized through actions of corporations to workers.
Yeah. But it's a hard thing to do. It's not even the small things take could levy a heavy cost.
Yeah.
You know. All right. Well, I think that's probably it for today. Unless you have anything else.
No, guys, that was wonderful. Have yourself a good one.
Yep. Thanks for listening, and have a great 2024.